Today we're going to talk about Muslim empires, and we're going to start by going back just a little bit to 1100 and talk about the rise of the Seljuk Turks. So we're going to go through three or four of these Muslim empires. The Seljuk Turks got their introduction into this part of the world. Turks themselves come from an area north of India, and they were brought into the Middle East by the Abbasids, who was a Muslim dynasty that ruled from Baghdad. They were brought in to be mercenaries, that is, soldiers for hire in Baghdad to guard the Abbasid rulers and sort of become the personal bodyguard for the Sultan. Eventually they come to control all of Anatolia. Anatolia is another name for that geographic area we call probably Turkey today. You might know it as Turkey today. But Anatolia then will be their base of operation, and of course, since we do call it Turkey today, that's in large measure because of the Seljuk Turks and other Turks that came to dominate that area. The Seljuk Turks begin to decline, and as they do, because they are attacked, and then the Osmali Turks will sort of step into that void. That's one of the things of history that we see. You don't have a power vacuum very long. Someone will come and step in and take control. So here is a map that shows you this area that's sort of orange there. This is the area of the Turks, and then you can notice this sort of brown area here. These are the areas they're expanding. So they're up in this northwest area of Anatolia, or what we would call Turkey today, and they will expand from there. So they expand from this brown area to this sort of orange area here. Well, the Osmali Turks are, like I said, originally from Central Asia, 9th to 11th century. They will live there. You can trace their origins to Osman. And here is a picture of Osman. 1280 to 1326, Osman. So hence the name Osmali comes from his name. And it's from Osmali that we get the name Ottoman. So they will expand north of Anatolia to the Dardanelles, which is the area back towards Istanbul, although not as far as Istanbul. And so they're in that area. They have the Byzantines sort of north of them and somewhat to the east. And that creates a buffer for them. They don't have to worry about anyone coming from further north to attack them. And they develop in this area. Now, eventually they'll cross the Dardanelles and they're taking territory from the Byzantines. So they move into the Balkan states. The Balkan states are those areas to the north. Basically, it would be, say, like Romania, Bulgaria, former Yugoslavia. These are all the Balkan states. They move into that area and begin to take control of that area as well. One of the things that they will do is they will have a recruitment of soldiers from Christians, because there's a lot of Christians up in that part that they take over. And basically this is sort of like a tax. People bring their sons out to the square of the town, out to the center of town, and then the Ottomans will select some of them to be taken to be trained to be soldiers, called Janissaries. So, in fact, while, it might seem sad that this happened, many of the parents knew that their son would have a much better education, perhaps a better life if they were chosen. And in fact, these boys will eventually convert. Many of them converted to Islam from Christianity, and they're called Janissaries, which comes from the Turkish Yenişehri, new troops. So this is, in fact, part of the reason they do this is that the Sultan wants troops that will be very loyal to him. And if he draws from the Muslim families already in the Ottoman world, they might see this as an opportunity maybe to either kill the Sultan or maneuver the Sultan to become more powerful. But these Janissaries are quite loyal, at least in the beginning, very loyal to the Sultan, because they know that their food, their lodging, everything was provided for them by the Sultan. So we'll see that eventually they will move into Europe. They move beyond sort of the local boundaries into Europe, into Bulgaria. Bayezid I will move into that area and conquer it. On, I believe 3 different occasions, they attempt to take the city of Vienna by moving up the Danube River. The Danube River flows all the way to the Black Sea. So they can follow it northward, north and west, into Vienna. This was, of course, a major city today in Austria. But they're never able to take that city, the city of Vienna. This first time, under Bayezid, they are threatening the city of Vienna. They retreat when Tamerlane, the Mongol leader, threatens Turkey or Asia Minor or Anatolia. Those are all 3 the same geographic area. So they go back home to sort of defend their homeland, and they leave very quickly. In fact, when they leave behind their tents and they leave behind their supplies. And one of the things they leave behind are sacks of coffee beans. And of course, the Europeans maybe had tried it on occasion, but this is their first chance to really get a hold of a good amount of it. And they began to get a taste for it. And of course, they were soon asking the Ottomans to buy coffee beans. This is why the very earliest coffee houses in Europe, in the West, are in Vienna. Coffee houses have been a part of Islamic culture for centuries. Since within Islam, people are not allowed to drink alcohol, coffee became the sort of drink of choice. Coffee houses became a place where men would socialize, hang out, talk about politics and things like that. Well, so they moved to the south to defend themselves against Tamerlane. Tamerlane had swept across the Middle East. He had taken Baghdad in 1393. He's a Mongol ruler. He had conquered Syria in 1400, 7 years later. And in 1402, he moves into the area we would call Turkey today. He defeats the Seljuk Turks and dies in 1403. That then sort of clears the way for the Ottoman Turks, or the Osmali Turks, to take the territory that had been controlled by the Seljuk Turks, and without the fear of the Mongols, because once their leader died, the Mongols left the area. So then the Ottomans take control of what we would call Turkey today. They keep expanding their territory, and they keep whittling away at the territory of the Byzantines. So in 1453, this guy, Mehmet II, will in fact take the city of Constantinople. He is sometimes called Mehmet the Conqueror because he conquered the city of Constantinople. he will change the name of it to Istanbul. Constantinople had been the last stronghold of the Byzantines and was a world-class city. It was surrounded by very thick walls, so very difficult to take. It also had a very fine harbor, and the harbor was guarded, the inlet to the harbor was guarded by a very large chain. The chain would in fact be tightened up. This would prevent ships from being able to enter the harbor, and for ships to enter they would loosen it, and the chain would drop into the water, and then they would tighten it up later. So this is what had prevented the Ottomans from taking Constantinople before. What Mehmet the Conqueror did is he actually ordered his men to get out of their boats, out of their ships, and to drag their ships across the ground and put into the water past the chain, and then went in and sort of surprised Constantinople and eventually could take the city that way. Well, Mehmet will also defeat the Safavids. This is another of these Muslim rulers and territories we want to talk about. They controlled Persia, and he defeated them and added that to the Ottoman control. The Ottoman leader Selim I takes Mesopotamia in 1514. And so now we see a pretty continuous territory from them, from up into Europe, that is the Balkan areas, down through what we would call Turkey today, Mesopotamia, which would be Iraq, Persia, which is Iran, and also defeats the Mamluks in Syria. And so now most of what we might consider the Middle East is under the control of the Ottomans, because they also take Cairo, Egypt, in 1517. So this now puts them in the position of being a major power, and they're only going to get bigger. Here's a map that shows them up to 1470. You see all that area in red. This is the Ottoman Empire. Here you see the Mamluks that are here. They're going to take that territory. We just talked about it with the Mamluks, and also going to take Mesopotamia over here, and going to go on down and take Egypt as well. Now, so that means by 1517, when they control Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Mesopotamia, and Persia, Iran, that they control all of the holy cities to Islam. Islam has three holy cities. Three holy cities. The most holy to them is Mecca. That's the one pictured down here in the lower right. Then there is Medina, which is north of Mecca. And then even much further north is Jerusalem. And that's the picture in the upper right here. This is the Dome of the Rock, as it's called. This was Jerusalem. Actually wasn't under their control until the 7th century, but according to the teachings of Islam, Muhammad was transported there, sort of, I guess, miraculously at night, and visited this spot, because this is the spot where Ibrahim had been, and was ascended into heaven there and got a vision, a glimpse of heaven, and then was transported on back to Arabia after that, all in one night. So Jerusalem was, in fact, the first city. You know that Muslims pray towards Mecca, but Jerusalem was the city in which they prayed first, in that direction, before Mecca had converted to Islam. So it's a very important city to them. Obviously, it's an important city for Muslims, for Jews, and for Christians as well. Because of this, they are now keepers of the holy places. The three holy cities are under their control, their protection, and so forth. And so the emperors now take the title of Caliph, or successor to Muhammad. This elevates their stature within the Islamic world. They have fleets that head out and will move across North Africa, taking Tripoli, Tunis, and all the way over to Algeria. One of the things that the Ottomans do is that they rule lightly. I guess I'd say they rule lightly. That is, they leave the current government in place, and then they take the current government, as long as they'll be loyal to the Ottomans, they allow them to be the rulers in that area. These rulers of the region, we would call them governors, but the Ottomans called them pashas. And these pashas had a lot of power within their area. But their main duty was keep the order, keep everybody in line, collect the taxes, and then deliver those taxes to the Ottomans. So by 1521 now, the Ottomans had a very large empire. They had taxes that were a fixed percentage. It had to go to the central government, and of course, like we said, keep the law and order. The Ottomans controlled the Red Sea. And this was then, they were the ones that encountered or had to try to resist the Portuguese taking over the trade to India through the Indian Ocean, because the Ottomans had been sailing through the Red Sea, going to India, picking up the spices and the other goods from India, bringing them back to the Middle East, and then selling them to the Europeans. So they made a lot of money on the spice trade, things from China and elsewhere. The Portuguese begin to cut into that. They actually defeat the Ottoman fleet in 1509. The Ottomans continue to try to move southward in Africa. They go down to Ethiopia. They attempt to take this area of Ethiopia, but they never took the country of Ethiopia, so it remained independent. And eventually the Ottomans gave up on that idea. Here is a picture of probably the most famous of all the Ottoman sultans, and one of the most powerful. And see, he rules for a very long time. He rules for over 40 years. His name is Suleiman, Suleiman the First, or Suleiman the Magnificent. Now, Suleiman is their way of saying Solomon. So he's Solomon. He moves up the Danube. He tries to take the city of Vienna again. He is able to take most of what we would call Hungary today, 1526. But he is stopped by a coalition of forces of Europeans in 1529, and they never take Vienna. This is usually considered to be the peak of the Ottoman Empire, and I suppose the beginning of the decline, because after this point, after 1529 or so, the Ottomans don't expand their territory anymore. And we can see, sort of looking back on it, after Suleiman, they start to run into a lot of problems with their dynasties. Part of the problem was actually the Sultan had many wives. He had a harem, or harem, that had many women there that were his wives, concubines. And in fact, his mother oversaw all those women and the women's quarters. But there was a lot of intrigue there, a lot of people, a lot of the women trying to get power, trying to maneuver themselves and their sons or their children into power. So finally, one of the practices that they had up to this point is that when the Sultan would come to power, he would execute all of his male relatives, all of his close male relatives, his brothers, his cousins, and so forth. Suleiman changed that practice, and most people, even though it's a cruel practice, most people see that as the beginning of the decline of the Ottomans, because there was so much intrigue as to who would come and take power, that there was so much infighting that it led to a real weakening of the Sultan and weakening of the Ottomans. So we see the Ottomans do begin to weaken in the 17th century. That's the 1600s. They have a lot of internal problems, like I said, especially about succession. and they certainly begin to decline. Remember, they had a light rule. They had a lot of provinces, you might call them, with governors. That works well as long as the Sultan is very powerful. But when the Sultan begins to weaken, then we see also that the Ottoman control over those areas, like, say, Egypt and so forth, begins to weaken. And the Pasha of Egypt becomes very important and begins to ignore what the Sultan in Istanbul wants. The Ottoman Empire, however, will continue on. It will not be gone until World War I. After World War I, actually, it will end, but it's in great decline in the 19th century, the 1800s, and it's called, at that time, the sick old man of Europe.